Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. From the price of your home to your car or your salary or even an employee's salary, to investor terms or even the terms of a divorce, some of the most important decisions you will make in life will require you to negotiate the terms. And unfortunately, most of us, especially here in the U.S., have no idea how to successfully negotiate, and we try to avoid the process entirely. In fact, when we're put into this situation, we tend to rely on a single strategy to get through this uncomfortable process as quickly as we can, and that is to simply offer to split the difference. How many times have you done that? I know I have. Well, today, that comes to an end. Today, you're going to learn how to negotiate from one of the best in the world, Christopher Voss. Now, Chris spent 24 years in the FBI, and in fact, he was the agency's lead international kidnapping negotiator. If you remember that movie called Proof of Life with Russell Crowe that came out 10, 15 years ago, well, that's basically Chris in real life. So he had to negotiate over 150 different kidnapping cases around the world, and his ability to successfully negotiate these tense situations literally meant life or death to the victim. Well, today he's going to teach you how to negotiate without confrontation and in a way that creates a win-win situation for both parties. And he's also going to teach you how to identify when you are being hustled or when you're being taken advantage of in a negotiation. This is an incredibly valuable skill set that each of us needs to master, and today is your chance to learn how from one of the absolute best in the world. So please help me welcome Christopher Voss. Welcome back, everybody, and today we have an absolutely fascinating guest joining us here on the podcast, as you've heard from the introduction just now. So without any further ado, Chris Voss, welcome to Self-Made Man.
Thank you, Mike. An absolute pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so I'm very, very excited about today's show because we're obviously going to be talking about negotiation, and specifically when it comes to business, which is a topic that I will freely admit I absolutely suck at. So we'll save that for later and my weaknesses in general. But I'm really grateful that you're here, and this is a topic that I don't think many people have an opportunity to get an education around, despite the fact that it's unbelievably important. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. You know, what is it, that joke that they make at AA? The first step is admitting you have a problem, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. And, I'm aware of it. And so I'm super excited about what we're going to learn today. And I figured we should start back with a little bit about your history. There's probably a good portion of our audience who have not come across your work yet. And I would love it if you would take us back in time about 25, 30 years ago and tell us how you got your start as a hostage negotiator for the FBI.
Yeah, well, it's kind of crazy because I'm a combination of a small town Iowa guy and some heavy duty time in New York City. So, the combination of Midwest, East Coast. But becoming a negotiator, like a lot of the things in my life, has happened as a result of what would have otherwise been perceived as a very negative event. I mean, some of the worst things that have happened to me have led on to incredibly great things. And I had torn up my knee in college because I wanted to go into law enforcement, and I was trying to give myself, the best physical capability. So I was studying martial arts. I'm just kind of a medium-sized guy, and as a cop, you're going to run across a lot of big guys. So I messed up my knee, and it was reconstructed. And then I was on a few years later, I'm on FBI SWAT. And I injured my knee in training again and have to have it reconstructed again. And at that point in time, I thought, well, there are only so many knee surgeries they're going to be able to do. Maybe I need to look at something else before the knee is completely shot while it's still functional. And a lot of SWAT guys, they're like professional athletes. They stay in it until they've accumulated too many injuries to keep going. So I knew the FBI had a hostage negotiators. I didn't really know what they did. I thought, how hard could it be? You talk to people. So, I'm sure like some people think, how hard can it be to host a podcast? Well, it's an incredible skill. I mean, you have to be an incredible host to be able to do it. It's not just talking. And so then I got in. Actually, I was rejected when I first approached the head of the negotiation team in the New York office of the FBI. Very smart, very, very tough New York woman, New York chick. And I say that with great reverence. And I sort of presented myself to her, and she was like, nah, go away. And I said, because she asked me, do I have any credentials? Do I have any background? Do I have any training? Do I have anything? And I said, no. And she said, no, well, beat it. Go away. Stop bothering me. She said, everybody wants to be a hostage negotiator. Everybody. Go away. But, one of the things that I'd learned is, ask the right person and do what they tell you. And I said, what can I do? There's got to be something I could do. And she said, there is. Go volunteer on a suicide hotline, which ended up really being the beginning of everything for me, and understanding emotional intelligence, like incredible depth. I mean, deep dive into what makes people tick. And when I went back to her last year and said, look, I got to include the story of, how you initially rejected me in the book. She said, in my career, I must have told 1,000 people to go volunteer at a hotline, and 2 of them did it, and you were one of them. Mm. Which to me is mystifying. Ask somebody and do what they tell you to do. Ask the right person, but and be smart enough to find the right person. But the head of the negotiation program ought to be the guy giving you or the gal giving you the advice. And that's how I ended up doing that. And it ended up being way more challenging and rewarding for me than SWAT ever was. I've loved it ever since.
Well, let's dive into your first couple of weeks, on the hotline. What does that look at? Where are you? I'm assuming most of these calls come in, late at night. And what do you do on your first call when, this is not a suicide hotline. This is a hostage. So someone has a hostage in their home
Well, no, actually it was a crisis hotline. It was run, it was actually originally it's attributed to being founded by Norman Vincent Peale, the guy who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking. Mm-hmm. In reality, it was his wife's idea, Ruth Stafford Peale. Phenomenal human being. They both had great vision, and it was a general crisis hotline. So it happened to be affiliated at the time with Peale's Church in Manhattan, but it was non-denominational. And after having spent a year and a half on the hotline, when I got to the hostage negotiation training at the FBI Academy, I remember saying to myself, I've been doing this for a year and a half. I just didn't have a SWAT team outside. It's that close in the dynamic. And so that, they give you some phenomenal training. They give you 2 solid months of training, 80 hours, and they put you on the line supervised. And then you begin to do this really, again, I'll use the phrase emotional intelligence. And you begin to see how it works magic with people. I mean, if you accept emotions as a driving force behind human beings, then it's a whole new ball game. And the amount of influence you can have on people is incredible.
What's the most memorable story or phone call that you had during those years?
I get a call one night, and a guy is absolutely beside himself over anxiety over something that's going to happen the next day. And through the course of the call, I only say 3 things to him. It takes about 9 minutes, and it turns him around 180 degrees from the beginning of the call. And I felt his anxiety at the beginning. He said, I'm trying to put a lid on this day, and I could hear it in his voice. And I said, you sound anxious. That's all I said. We got scientific data now that backs up that if you observe, or what I refer to label, a negative emotion, don't deny it, just state it, just observe it. It actually slows down and diminishes the reaction in the part of the brain where negativity bounces around. And I use that as a skill in business negotiation all the time. I'll say, you guys are really unhappy with me. You think I'm being unfair. And that makes it go away. It doesn't reinforce it. So, a law of the emotion universe is observing a negative diminishes it every single time without fail. That might not make it go away, but it always diminishes it. I didn't know that at the time. I just labeled what I heard. And so, but now I've got him in a more solid state of mind, and he's talking, he's telling me about what he's dealing with. And then he's got a lot of support from his family, and he's going on about his family. So I observe a positive, which is sort of a summary of what he said. And I said, wow, sounds like your family's really close. And I'd had somebody once say that to me when I was describing my family, and I have a very clear recollection of how enormously good it felt at the time. So when I said that to him, I immediately, massive amount of strength comes into his voice. And he's talking a little bit more, and he's telling me how hard he's working to try to beat these problems. And it just struck me that he sounded really determined. So that's all I said. And again, it's labeling a positive now. Labeling positives reinforces them. Labeling negatives diminishes them. Our gut instinct is the opposite is true, but it's not. So I hit another positive. I said, you sound really determined. And then bang, that put him over the top. He's like, I am determined. He says, I'm going to be fine tomorrow. Thanks for everything you've done. And he hangs up. And I just said 3 things, which is really the essence of a lot of how we manage all our relationships and our business relationships. Like if I'm in a contentious negotiation these days, I label the negative. I say, I don't want you to think I'm a jerk. That's a denial. That's wrong. But I say, look, it really seems like I've been really hard on you guys. It seems like I've been a jerk here. And people look at you and they'll say, you haven't been that bad, which is the opposite of the reaction that you expect. And I learned that way back when in the early 90s on a suicide hotline, crisis hotline in New York City at 11 o'clock at night. And I've been using that stuff ever since.
It's interesting when you're talking about that story. The first thing that I think about is a technique that my son's mother and I have been using with our 5-year-old for, years now. And it's this simple act of acknowledgement. And so whenever you have a young child who's having an emotional outburst, thank God we picked this up in some book. I don't remember where, but it's very simple. Acknowledge the emotion. So when he's having a breakdown, hey, buddy, I can see that you're really upset right now. Or, hey, I can see that you really want to play with that toy or, whatever. And as soon as you acknowledge how they're feeling, within 60 seconds, it all goes away. So
it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
That's how we're wired as human beings. Mm-hmm. And that's why it works. And that's also why this stuff works across cultures, because it's how we're wired as human beings.
What other stories have you had, and maybe some of the more challenging ones on the hostage side? And I'm trying to think here as well, from a crisis hotline perspective, is there a typical type of call that you get, a very common crisis, if you will, that the majority, of your calls are about, if there's a common problem that most people experience?
Well, the most common thing, counterintuitively, on any crisis hotline or a phone line where there are people that sort of have to listen, is actually the extremely manipulative types. So a crisis hotline is a great place to go learn to deal with highly manipulative people, what some people refer to as energy vampires or difficult people, the people that just suck the life out of you. Because those people in day-to-day life, people are so sick of talking to them, the only people they can get to talk to them are the ones on the hotline. So, and you get a lot of practice on it, which is, for me, was great, because I went to the hotline to learn a skill. I loved it because it helped people, which is kind of the foundation of my negotiation philosophy now. If it satisfies both the mercenary and the missionary in you, then you should do it. If it works and it meets certain moral guidelines, then go for it, which means that you will use the negotiation techniques that highly manipulative people use, but you're not using it to take advantage of people.
How can you identify people who are manipulating you if they're really skilled in, and let's say, by default, I'm a very trusting individual.
Right.
And I don't, by default, have a belief that I'm going to be intentionally manipulated by someone, even though I have been. So how do you identify that?
Well, there's some intentional manipulation, and there's some manipulation traps that we all fall into. I mean, the guy that is going to try to lead me down the path by getting me to say yes. Would you like to make more money? Would you like to be happier? Would you like to have a 125-foot yacht? Anybody that's trying, that's both an attribute of highly manipulative people, and unfortunately, it's used on us so much that a lot of times, if we're just trying to construct an argument, some people will do that. But I always know it's going someplace. So that's a form of manipulation that I push back on immediately. And actually, we all do as soon as somebody starts trying to get us to say yes. The other thing that the real manipulative people will do is they'll do things like their overuse of what and how questions inappropriately. And a what and a how question in the right context, you should ask the other side, how do you want to proceed? What do you want to do next? And the manipulative guy, after you've just explained to them what you want them to do, will look at you and say, well, what do you want me to do? And that question in and of itself is, we want to answer it so much that we will forget that we just told this guy or gal what we wanted them to do, and they completely ignored it and said, what do you want me to do? And that's actually one of how and what questions are definitely questions that begin with how and what are use your powers for good and not evil. They should be very good part of your arsenal in a great negotiation. And they are also used by the very manipulative people against us.
So you spent 24 years, working for the FBI as a negotiator. When did you decide to make the transition into business and to bring this skill set to the business world?
Well, I finally ended up, I'm running our international kidnapping operations, our response, and I got the responsibility for every American kidnapped overseas anywhere in the world, which was a cool job. I was privileged to do it. And I was surrounded by people on my team. I worked with superstars. I worked with all stars. It was a lucky time. And we had a kidnapping that kind of didn't turn out the way we expected it to. The hostages, the 2 of the 3 remaining hostages, and it's in my book, and it happened in the Philippines, were the bad guys didn't kill him, but they didn't release him either. And then the hostages were killed by friendly fire on a botched rescue attempt. And at that time, we kind of did a review of everything that we'd done, and I ran everything by the numbers. My team, we ran things by the numbers, and it wasn't enough. So I thought, this means if what we know isn't enough, we have to look outside hostage negotiation. I went to connected up with the guys at Harvard Law School, very wonderful people, receptive to collaborating with me, and I negotiated my way into their key negotiation course. And they let me come in. I to my knowledge, I'm the only FBI agent that on duty that has ever gone through that course who wasn't a student.
You mentioned real quick before we continue down the business path, that you were involved in a lot of hostage negotiation stuff. And I have to tell you, I'm unbelievably interested in getting some insight on that process. And primarily, a couple of weeks ago, a story that pops into my head is I was watching a Formula One race on television. I'm a big Formula One fan. And the announcer had mentioned that Bernie Ecclestone, who is the owner of modern day Formula One, his mother-in-law was recently kidnapped in South America. And she's, as far as I know, still currently being held for an unbelievably large amount of money. All I've ever seen of this process is what I've seen in the movies. And so the question I have for you is, when it comes to somewhat sophisticated criminals who are in the hostage ransom game, is there a methodology or a process that they follow and that you follow, and they're just trying to end in a deal and they don't care if the person lives or dies? It's more of a business transaction for them? Or is it completely fluid? Every single scenario is different and you have no idea what's going to end up happening?
No, it's for them, it's a business transaction. That's a horrifying reality. And as it's one of the aspects of hostage negotiation that I put into our business negotiation every day. And the first step is understanding how the other side looks at it and being able to completely understand it so you can find their vulnerabilities. So kidnappers around the world, even whether it's in South America, whether it's in the Middle East, they're commodities dealers. And they're either after money or they're after attention or they're after political influence, but there's always a commodity they're after. You identify the commodity, and interestingly enough, every country has a market price and a duration that they expect the kidnapping to last. And then what you do is you take them slowly out of their dynamic without them knowing you're doing it to them. And it's a hard bargaining business negotiation.
What do you do in a scenario where it's like, okay, I'll send you $100,000 and whatever, and they come back and like, nope, $500,000. Like, is there a point to this where the transaction actually ends up, turning out the way everybody agreed upon, and the people come back, or, what does that look like?
Absolutely. It's a bargaining process. There's a rule in that negotiation and any other with a tough bargainer. The hard bargainer on the other side is going to stay in the game until they feel like they've gotten everything they can. So your job is to help them come to that perception, make them feel like they've worked for it. Use a number of psychological tricks. I think I got very good at it when I was coaching negotiations internationally, because an FBI kidnapping negotiator, what we really are great negotiation coaches. Because I don't speak 148 language. I kind of speak one. So I'm going to show up in a country and I've got to be prepared to coach a negotiation within 6 hours of the moment that I get off the plane. I find a guy that speaks a language that knows the industry, if you will. I can coach in any industry. If I find a guy that knows his industry, I know negotiation. And, we start to coach it. We approach it as a human nature based thing. I think we raised it to another level in my last few years in the Bureau, and we were getting, if you will, better deals than anybody else was. I prided myself on stretching the bad guys as far as possible without angering them, getting hostages out alive, and setting them up for any follow-on that was necessary. But yeah, you make a deal, you expect the other side to comply, and you have to understand what they look like when they're lying and what they look like when they're telling the truth.
Interesting, fascinating stuff that I'm very grateful that I do not have to think about on a daily basis right now, but unbelievable. So, when it comes to the business side, and let's get back on that train track, what are some of the most common problems that you see when it comes to business owners and the negotiation process?
Try to make your point. And I was sitting with a friend of mine from State Department the other day, former state guy, and he said, I went to some negotiation training, and they said there are 3 steps. And the first is making sure you get your point across, making sure they see your position. And that is horrible. Because what happens then is you've got 2 people talking at each other till they're exhausted. So trying to make sure the other side understands you is actually step 3, not step 1. Because when you're talking to someone who's intent on making their point, which is what that dynamic is, you might as well be talking to a paranoid schizophrenic. They are not going to hear a word you say. And that dynamic continues until one of the other 2 people, we all learn the best way to get somebody to shut up is to look them in the eye and say, "You're right." And that's what we say to coworkers who will not let up on us. That's what we say to a boss who we have no intention of going along with. And the greatest practitioners of your right on the planet are husbands.
Right. Okay. Well, you mentioned, or alluded to the fact that people skip to step number 3. What is step number 1?
Well, actually, interestingly enough, you want to get a "that's right" out of the person that is talking to you. So the sooner I get you to acknowledge, if I know you're going to be intent on getting your point across to me and you're not going to listen to a word that I say until you do. And so actually I'm going to need to summarize where you're coming from, even in ways that might sound against my interests, so that you look me in the eye and say, "That's right." And then the doors open. Because once somebody has said "that's right," and that was what sold my book to the publisher. It blew them away at the thought that I'm not trying to get people to say yes to me. I'm trying to get people to say "that's right." I mean, people open up to you, and that's where you find the better deal. Never be so sure of what you want that you wouldn't take something better. You're not getting to the better deal until your counterpart has looked you in the eye. And it's an epiphany moment for them. I mean, it's a step forward. It's a revelation. And they'll say it in a lot of different ways. They'll almost be mystified by what they've just gotten out of what you repeated back to them. And then they want to cooperate.
So can you, I want to make sure I understand and that everybody listening understands this, because I think it's really, really important. Can you give me a quick example of what this would look like, right? Because the way I'm understanding it or picturing in my head is that I'm talking to Bob and we need to negotiate a contract, for something. And he's starts by listing off all of the things that he wants and that are important to him and that he needs to get. And my response should be, yeah, Bob, that's totally right. I understand, or help me make sure that I'm correct, but you are looking for this, 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 and this. Is that right? Or something along those right? Am I getting that correct?
You're really close. And see, every time you did that, you finished by trying to get your counterpart to say yes. And that's where you kill yourself, because you want to say, is that correct? Do I have that right? Every one of those is an attempt to elicit a yes, which creates a small amount of defensiveness, no matter how well-intentioned you are. So what you just did with me right now is, first of all, drop off every time you try to get him to say yes. That just makes the dynamic easier. And then I would say, I'd say, Bob, all right, so these things are important to you because the future of your company is important to you. I'd list off the things and then what's driving them to want those things. And then just go silent. And if you don't get it, that's right, then you haven't dug deeply enough. And I'll give you a real life example. I got one of my clients is a pharmaceutical saleswoman, and she's got a hot new drug that she's trying to sell to a doctor who she's been selling to. And she's pitching a drug, and he is not giving her the time of day. She just doesn't care. He doesn't care. So we go through the that's right thing. She sets an appointment with him, and her one goal, nothing else, is to sit down with this guy and get it that's right out of him. And again, some of it is saying stuff that sounds like it's against your interest to get him to come out. And she says to him, your patients are important to you. They're not just patients, they're people. You're responsible for their lives. And you're not going to just take the hottest new drug that some pharmaceutical company has got, that some pharmaceutical salesperson is peddling to you because it's a high profit drug. You're very careful with people, and you want to make sure that you care for their entire lives. And she said he turned and looked at her as if it was the first time he'd ever seen her. And he said, that's right. And she sold the product to him. She almost sounded like she was talking him out of it because it was his perspective. But it was about all his caution and his barriers. And bang, as soon as she got a that's right out of him, she made the sale.
We'll say, okay, so that was leading to my next question, right? The door is now open, and it seems like there is ample opportunity to jump in it when you see that window to go too fast and to go for the sale and to screw it all up. So I have a feeling, step number 2 in this process, there's got to be a transition, if you will.
Well, and the first thing is, first of all, you want to see if it'll come to you from a that's right. You got to give it a chance for it to be their idea, because the key to implementation is when it's the other side's idea. The classic phrase, the art of negotiation is letting the other side have your way. Well, this is how you get to that point. You need to let them suggest the solution. So you wait 3 seconds, which can seem like an eternity. And if it's clear that they're not going to make the next suggestion, that's when you follow up with the magic what question that I referred to earlier, because it's so powerful. And then you say, what do you want to do? And people feel enormously empowered by that, because you've got to get them to come up. If you want implementation, and that's the key to profitability. Yes is not profitability. Implementation is profitability. And your implementation is from the other side is always higher when it's their idea. And that's where you're trying to get.
And so what if their plan of action, their offer, is not acceptable to you? It's just let's just say it's not even feasible. They want a price that you can't offer.
Yeah, so great question. What if worst case scenario comes up? And I teach people there are basically 4 ways to say no. You let out no a little at a time. What you want to do is push back on a solution and stay in the conversation. And it can be a variety of answers from, I'm sorry, I'm afraid that just doesn't work for me, which is a little stronger. Actually, my favorite go-to is in a very deferential tone of voice, which is because there's great power in deference. You're amazed what you can get away with saying. You look them and say, how am I supposed to accept that? And that draws out answers. I mean, there's a couple of things that we're afraid that might go also. And one of the things we want to do in negotiation is find out whether or not there's anything on the table. So the answer that we're horrified that we're going to get when we say, how am I supposed to accept that, is the other person's going to look at us and say, because you have to.
Right. So, what do you say?
That's where you want to go.
Yeah.
Because you've now just found out there's no more negotiating room. And in the process of finding out on that point, there's most of the time to find out there's no more negotiating room, the person's got to slam their hands down on the table and walk away. Well, that response is a person telling you they've gone as far as they can without slamming their hands down on the table and walked away.
Mm.
There are bad deals. And now you're smarter because now you have a clear indicator of whether you take this deal or not. In reality, what happens is you usually have to say, how am I supposed to accept that no less than 2 times. I'm coaching another client through a real estate negotiation in the Hollywood Hills out here in Los Angeles. They're trying to get a house for $20,000 a month, and they're doing it on behalf of a wealthy family, and they're in the negotiation with the leasing agent, and the leasing agent throws out a price, and my client says, how am I supposed to do that? And then the leasing agent caved in on several terms to make the package more acceptable. And they talked a little bit more and summarized the terms. And again, he said, how am I supposed to do that? And the leasing agent said, well, if your client wants the house, you're going to have to do it. Perfect. That's where you want to be. You now know that you pushed as far as you can. And now it's either a yes or no. And you're still talking. You still have a relationship. If he'd have said no, then he could have come back and done another deal on another house with the same realtor the following week because they had a good working relationship the entire time.
So, my personality type is one that is very uncomfortable with confrontation.
Right.
I don't enjoy that at all. And so I'm very good at selling something, especially when it's not in person. The moment that it becomes in person, I'm very quick to take less of an appealing deal than I'm sure I could get because I just want to say yes rather than go through the negotiation process because I want to avoid the confrontation aspect that I feel in that situation. What advice would you have for somebody like myself?
Okay, the first part is, again, this is why I love the deferential approach. Because the deferential approach then you want to start taking the sting out of confrontation. So to start with, I'm deferential, I'm collaborative. I want to give the other side every chance to work with me to make a great deal. Now, the second thing, let me ask you, what's your reaction to the idea of a focused comparison?
That's very benign, feels very benign to me.
Right, exactly. And that's actually one definition of confrontation. You don't want a confrontation, but what if we arrange simply a focused comparison? And and that's how to keep the negotiation going, to compare things, which then preserves a relationship. So I might say, all right, so this is true and this is true. How do these things add up? How am I supposed to make that work? That's taking 2 things and asking the other side to help you understand. And that keeps the conversation going on pointed issues of contention without making it confrontational. And I can't confront a kidnapper internationally. I mean, I had to raise my level of game to the point where I can put up a barrier with a killer and there's no harm done. And I coach negotiations with killers on a regular basis. And our how questions and a version of how we're supposed to do that, we ask that question around the globe to some of the most vicious killers you could imagine. And not one of those times resulted in any harm in the dynamic. People feel empowered by that. So if it works for the kidnapper, saying, how am I supposed to do that, is going to work with any business deal.
Right. Yeah, it makes total sense. So, a couple of months ago, you basically took these last 25, 30 years of expertise and put it all down into a book. And I thought the title was very interesting. It's called Never Split the Difference. And, that in my head means that it really comes from the old saying of, the common man's version of negotiation, which is, hey, okay, well, let's just split the difference, right? If you're arguing over $1,000 discount on a car, in the price, let's just split the difference, and I'll take $500 and you take $500. So I thought it was very interesting that the title is Never Split the Difference. So could you walk us through why you named the book that and what it means from your perspective?
Well, there's a saying out there that the guy that wants to split the difference is often a poor judge of distance. And so what that means is the first move that everybody learns in negotiation is to anchor high, to ask for way more than what they are willing to settle for. So if I wanted $500 for you from that car, I'd tell you I wanted $1,000, so you'd offer to split the difference, and I get my $500 anyway. And that seems eminently fair. And that's the F word in negotiations, fair. And you'd be stunned. I don't know that I've ever been in a negotiation where the F word, the F bomb, fair, wasn't dropped. It's enormously powerful. It's actually, you asked me before about the difficult negotiators. They will get you with the F bomb, with the F word. If somebody in a negotiation looks at you and says, I just want what's fair, or I've given you a fair offer, they've just hit you with an incredible emotional jab.
Because they're questioning, if you question that from their fair offer, right, they're essentially questioning your level of integrity or, perception of fairness as an individual. Are they judging your character? Right.
Exactly. It all comes through in these, you're getting hit with these stealth bombs. One of my favorites was the last NFL lockout. I wasn't following it really closely, so I wasn't sure really whose side I was on. And the players are trying really hard to get the owners to open up the books to the franchises. The Players Association says, we're happy to settle if you guys will just open up the books. And the NFL owners rep held a press conference and said, we've given the players a fair offer. And it settled not long after that, and the books were never opened. So the sharks out there understand how powerful splitting the difference and fair can be in putting people where they wanted to be all along anyway. And so when every now and then somebody inadvertently is going to offer to split the difference, but at the same time, that's always a shortcut of the situation. I'm tired. When you say, let's split the difference, if you're just a regular guy and not a manipulative guy, what you're really saying is, look, I'm tired. I don't know where the answer is. And I'm so worn out here that, let's just throw a dart at the wall and see if it sticks, see what it hits. And that's kind of actually an imprecise way to come to an agreement also. So splitting the difference is used on a regular basis by the people that are trying to cut our throats. And sometimes it's used because we're just tired and we don't want to put in the work to find a great deal, which then means we're going to have implementation problems. So
your solution to that is obviously covered in the book, but
yeah, buy the book.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, I did. As I was getting ready and preparing for an interview, I was like, I could definitely use this in my life right now. So, I've got a copy from Amazon on the way. But so, if you could give us, one last piece of advice when it comes to that, how do you not split the difference, or give us some basic ideas of what that looks like?
Say you dig a little more deeply into what they're trying to get out of it. I mean, there's some cliche answers, but you got to trigger people's thinking a little bit. You might actually want to propose things that won't work because it's an entire dynamic of getting somebody to say no. I mean, I like making people say no. I don't avoid no, and I don't look at no as an obstacle to overcome. Like if I'm going to propose a solution, I will say, "Is this a ridiculous idea?" And it gives them a chance to I love that question actually, because we're so used to being pushed for yeses. As soon as somebody tries to get us to say no, the dynamic changes entirely and people talk. You'd be stunned at what people are willing to say no to if you just say it right. You're talking to your boss, you might, and the boss has put you in a bad situation. Say, do you want me to fail? That I have advised so many people to use that, and it has opened up so many doors for people. So to try to get to a better answer, you might say, all right, well, we can't find out what works here. Let's find out what doesn't work, and let's knock that out of the way. Maybe what we're left with is going to be the answer. And as soon as you put people in a position where they're starting to get rid of stuff, they actually evaluate things much more carefully, and then decide whether or not it's going to work. So getting rid of what doesn't work is often a great criteria for finding out what does work.
So if you could give us a quick summary, because this is such an important skill set. It's something that you'll use for the rest of your life if you'll acquire this. Give us a quick summary of who this book is right for, all of the different types of scenarios that you cover, because I know the situations where this knowledge can be applied is quite broad.
Well, if you want to get greater collaboration among the people that you work with, if you have a sneaking suspicion that you're being fed that's right a lot, you're having trouble with implementation, it's great colleague to colleague negotiation. Because one commodity that's present in every negotiation is time. Money's not always there, time always is. And that's why we're all negotiating on a regular basis in ways we don't understand, because we don't realize that time is the principal commodity. It's that great line from Wall Street 2, the most valuable commodity is time. So it's great for colleague to colleague negotiations. It's great for contract negotiations. And if you're negotiating contracts where putting penalty clauses in your contracts is important to you, I'm here to tell you that what you're saying is, I don't know how to negotiate a contract that'll be implemented. And you need to start over again, because you're saying all my deals are so bad that I have to take people hostage to get them to comply. That's an implementation issue. Yes is nothing without how. So if you're negotiating contracts.
Have you ever, and you own a company called the Black Swan Group, and this is really the consulting side of your negotiation practice, correct?
Yes.
And I'm thinking of the fact that I can use this ability when it comes to hiring people for the company and negotiating salaries or benefits and things like that. Negotiating supply contracts, manufacturing contracts. And I'm also, wondering if you have a lot of experience when it comes to negotiating terms for raising capital. So if I were going to go out and raise capital for my new startup, and I've got to talk to some because they're all very savvy if they're successful venture capitalists, if you will. I'm definitely the minnow swimming around in the shark tank. Is that something that you have experience in as well, to make sure that I negotiate terms that, are a win-win for everybody? And I'm definitely not going to end up, the victim here and being kicked out of my own company or something like that. Yeah,
because you hit the nail on the head. Every VC wants, and they're kind of like forgive me, some international negotiators are famous for giving a great price because they know that they're going to kill you with the terms. And, a VC can promise you any amount of money as long as they have the authority to throw you out of your company. So understanding that's where they're coming from to begin with, your real objective in that is not necessarily showing that you don't want to be thrown out, but showing that you're coachable and learnable and you want to ramp up with them. Because the reality is, what got you here won't get you there. A lot of entrepreneur startup guys are not CEOs. Those are two different jobs. So what you want to negotiate then is yours, like any other job, your successful ascension to the next level. And worry less about the payout, because they're going to want to pay you out to get rid of you because you got a great idea. And if you're not talking about your own personal development as the founder of a company, just like you're not talking about your own personal development, your salary negotiations at work, then if you haven't got an eye on it, they already have a gut instinct that you're not going to get there. So an entrepreneur's real focus in this is not necessarily how do I keep from getting kicked out, but how do I grow myself with my company so they continue to see me as an asset and as a part of the future.
Awesome. Well, this has been an unbelievably fascinating topic that I don't think gets the amount of attention and light that it deserves, considering the fact that these are some of the most important negotiations that we'll go through in life. And with that being said, I have one more scenario that is going to be very, very common for everybody listening to this. Do you have any experience that you can provide on a consulting level or in the book when it comes to prenups?
I haven't had that much dealing with prenup, but again, that's, you're talking about penalty clauses here. And anytime you start talking about penalty clauses, that has to tell you that your foundation from the beginning might be off track. So, my answer to you is you may need to go back several steps as opposed to engaging in penalty clauses. And then again, I mean, you want to be vicious in a prenup negotiation. Start, beat the other side to the punch on what's fair. You're going to get a tremendous advantage. You just say, look, tell me when what I'm asking for isn't fair. The minute I take a different take on the F word myself. Instead of saying I'm giving you a fair offer, I'll say very early on, as soon as I'm not treating you fairly, let me know, stop me, and we'll go back. That'll actually tip the dynamic in your favor, and also then reorient your negotiations so you guys are both moving towards the best place you can possibly be anyway.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a much more collaborative approach than it is an argumentative, manipulation-based one, which is awesome. So, Chris, thank you so much for introducing this topic and your skill set to our audience. Where can people go connect with you and buy a copy of Never Split the Difference?
All right, so the best price for the book's on Amazon. I got to hand it to Amazon. They get great prices, and that's still the best price for the book. And obviously, you get it delivered quickly. Go to our website, blackswanltd.com. Black like the color, swan like the bird with one N, LTD, blackswanltd.com. We are not ballerinas. And there's a lot of free stuff that we put out. We put out a complimentary negotiation advisory newsletter twice a month that's really easy to digest, and it also lets people know when we hold the occasional training, and it's a way to either maintain your skill level or help raise yourself to the next level. So there's a lot of stuff that we put out that's complimentary on the website if you want to get better at negotiation.
Awesome. And I would assume that if someone has a unbelievably important negotiation that they're going to be taking on, that they can give you a call and involve you in that process on a consulting level and receive your help on that.
We coach people through some pretty serious stuff, through some pretty cool stuff. Yeah, we like coaching. I think we're really good at coaching people.
Awesome. I think I'm going to be taking you guys up on that here in the coming months with some manufacturing stuff, which are some very big things that I need to negotiate. So thank you so much for your time today, guys. Go connect with Chris and check out his book. I've got my copy on the way. Chris, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming on the show, and we'll see all of you guys next week.
Mike, thank you.
You're very welcome.